Hi, and welcome to this catch-up. I'm here in Mountain View in good old California, and I've got a very special guest today that I'd like to introduce. So, if you could tell us who you are and where you come from.
Hi, thanks, Craig. I'm John Hayes, and I'm the co-founder of Pure Storage, and so I'm hoping to be caught up with. So let's dive in.
You like the catch-up, so it's like a vCatchup. So
okay.
you know, like they've been the virtualization community. Everything starts with a small V.
All right.
Thing. So, but yeah, so we'll jump into the questions. Usual format. I've got about 5 or 6 questions that I've got for John. I think we'll just jump straight into them and go for it. So. The first question I really wanted to talk about was just understanding a bit more about what your role is in Pure Storage, and obviously you're one of the founders of the company. And what does it actually mean to be a founder? What does that actually involve?
Well, being a founder is something that's really unusual. When we started the company, I would spend all day, every day developing software, and I did that for probably the first 2 years. But this is the first company I've ever founded, so I had to learn a lot along the way. And one of the things I've learned is that your job is to do as little as possible. In other words, I guess, find talented people to do the hard work, because if you really want to grow a company, you need to just keep adding and adding more people who are more capable than you or differently capable. And so your job is really to do nothing. And you never get there because the amount of work to do in a startup is endless. And there's always new stuff. And so what that means is, I started out doing something that I think I'm really good at, and maybe my mom thinks I'm really good at it, which is developing software. And I've had the wonderful experience of being able to look at more and more parts of the business, not being as good as someone else until we find someone to do it. And so there's, there almost is no typical day. But I'd say that the number one thing that's important that I do is just pay attention to the team, and that's growing the team and the people who do the real work and really make the company what it is.
Cool. Yeah. Did you find that difficult, and that transition from, obviously being involved in producing the code and creating what essentially is the company, through to then, being more, having to take a back step and then being more involved in actually crafting who's doing what? And
well, I'd say it was difficult, partly because it took me by surprise, that I didn't know that that's what I would have to do. And sort of Cause, my co-founder, took that step in a very different way, where he goes back to Veritas, where he sort of founded through there, and then he started this company fresh, being CTO and being more hands-off, and he pushed everything onto me. And I had to do the same transition sort of in place, where there wasn't some big step. And so it was difficult because I had to figure out what is new to do. And it's almost like reapplying for the same job, or reapplying for a new job, where you get rid of everything, or you find great people to do what you used to do. And then you come into work and you have to figure out what's next. And that's a lot of really understanding the company and what is needed.
Yeah, right. Okay. Wow. So it's more, I guess it's more, the emphasis more becomes for you for building the company and turning the company into something, as opposed to being, I don't know, a cog in the machine that kind of produces what.
Well, I guess I'm a different kind of cog. I have to give Scott Deason, our CEO, credit for building the company, and I'm playing my part in that. Just trying to fill in more on the technical side, but sometimes just explaining and understanding it. And one of the nice things you get is being in the position of founders. You have access to customers, you have access to salespeople, and seeing that end to end, and trying to reintegrate that so you know what you have to do to keep evolving the company and growing it. What are the big challenges, and trying to get an unfiltered view of what's going on in the world, because as companies get bigger and bigger, it's easy to focus on the inside and look at everything we're doing on the inside and forget what's on the outside. And so I try and take the opportunities I can to look at what's going on outside, and
really
making sure that we bring that in.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And so my next question was, kind of on a side to that is what's it been like building a storage startup? And you kind of touched on it a bit, but what's it been like building a storage startup as opposed to working for a large vendor? Because I believe you were at like Yahoo before.
I was at Yahoo.
How's that? I mean, you kind of got into some of it.
There's some. Yahoo was a singular experience for me. It's the only big company I ever worked for.
Right, okay.
When I first came to California, I worked for a series of startups in mostly the consumer space. Like we were building virtual worlds and building karaoke systems. And then I ended up at Yahoo. And, so that was also another experience. But, even small companies want to be big companies eventually. But I'd say, the biggest difference is there's a lot of focus in most big companies on defending what you have. It's almost more important that you'd rather with absolute certainty grow the company by 5% than with great uncertainty double what's addressable. There's a lot of focus on thinking about how to best serve the customers you have, and sometimes to the extent that it ignores the ones you don't, or the ones you could get, or you look at how they're using your product and versus what are the real problems in their life, and it's hard to bring that perspective into a real company. And I didn't even realize that at the time. I went to the meetings and I made all the same mistakes, and it's something that wasn't obvious until after I left. And we come to Pure and we have a clear mission and we have nothing to defend because everything's new. And we're going to go out and try and make a difference.
Okay. Wow, that's really. What was your actual role in Yahoo then? What is it you actually did at Yahoo?
So I did a couple things. So I was brought into Yahoo as part of an acquisition. That was big. So that was the video karaoke. Some months after they bought us, they decided that video karaoke was not the future of Yahoo. as surprising as that is. Most of the team transitioned to work for Yahoo Groups. I remained working for Mike Spicer, who eventually became our Series A VC. And so that at that time, that was when Jerry Yang was CEO. And he was going to bring a new technical focus to the company and introduce this whole social framework. And so I worked as on the product side of social framework, trying to convince product teams to integrate it into their products. And what they were trying to do is cross-connect all of sports users and mail users and into a singular experience. And so I spent time on that. I spent time working for a gentleman who became the chief technologist. He worked on Yahoo Pipes. I worked a bit on the Yahoo application framework, a small bit. But it was very, scattered. What was interesting though was at least working on the social framework, got to see a lot of breadth of the company and how there's all these separate businesses. So that was sort of a time in my life where I didn't write much software. There was a lot of more meetings and trying to understand, and so that was very interesting personally, even if it was frustrating at the time.
I had this thought there just about social storage. Is that what Pure is? Are we creating a social storage system? Is that what?
Maybe.
I'm joking.
I guess so. Yeah.
It's just the word social.
Storage has to tweet a bit more.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Exactly.
Storage telling you what's going on. That sounds like a good idea. It does. Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. Yeah. So look, really a bit of a focus on Pure Storage for a moment, but I was really kind of wanting to understand, what the technical problem that you were trying to solve when you and Cos kind of came up with the idea for Pure Storage. What was the fundamental problem that you were trying to fix?
The fundamental problem was cost, and it was 100% cost, because that was at the time. Well, there was also reliability. So you turn back the clock to 2009, and that was when MLC drives first came out, and they were awful, like 5% failure rates. And over the next year, the drive vendors, they got better and they fixed it. But so there was reliability concern, but that was worked through by the vendors. But cost was the number one issue, and this was really Cos's insight, was that the only thing keeping Flash out of the general purpose storage is cost. It's that if you want to go in and replace someone's storage array, you have to make everything right. Like it has to go and has to have the same functionality, but also it has to have the same cost. And at the time we looked at the possibility, like we looked at a number of architectures, like should we build a hybrid system? If we had started a couple of years earlier, maybe that would have been the case. But fortunately we were just too lazy, because we realized we'd have to build two completely whole storage systems. We'd rather just build one and just make a bet on the fundamentals being right, and that we can hit a reasonable data reduction target. And we exceeded the original data reduction target to actually meet that goal. And so within that, it's like, well, how do you meet the cost? Is, well, you build a really complex system that is
Yeah.
deduping compression. And so, you translate, well, what is the business challenge into a technical challenge? And technical challenge is paramount. It's how do you do deduplication? And how do you build that and compression more? And how do you build that in a way that's fundamentally compatible with Flash? And so the exciting thing for me there was that it's something that hadn't been done before. No one was building storage systems designed specifically for the Flash media. And that's great, because when I came into the company, I hadn't worked on storage systems before. The good news is neither had anyone else.
Wow, that's interesting.
So we had there was the challenge, but that was also the big attraction. Was, okay, let's solve this big problem, and we can take a huge chunk out of a big existing industry.
Do you think, and sorry to jump in there, but do you think that the fact that you didn't have a storage background kind of helped? That you could look at this problem from afresh without, a full, a big understanding of what had been done previously. Because you made a really good point there. Like a lot of storage vendors, what they'll do is they'll just take their existing controllers, which is really built to, sustain like spinning disk, and then they'll just put Flash in there, and then hey presto, I've got a Flash solution. So
I don't know. I mean, I can't tell the counterfactual because I still don't know much. But Cause did some experiments. I mean, he has deep connections into the storage industry, and he pulled people, really talented storage engineers from his past, and sort of got them to design something. And they came up with something that was considerably more conventional. Taking all the usual rules of thumbs of storage systems. So I do believe that it made a big impact. But that was also part of the theory of the company. Is why should this company exist? If there wasn't a big technological change, then you can do what you described. Is just take an existing product. Established companies would have a massive advantage because they have all these well-developed, thoroughly tested products that they could build on top of. Our theory came down to is that if we want to hit price and reliability targets, that you needed a whole new architecture. And if you're going to build a whole new architecture, you pretty much have to do that in a startup. Doing that in the context of a big company is extremely difficult. I guess that was the other thing I learned at Yahoo. Launching a project that will take 2 to 3 years is almost impossible inside of an established company. Imagine that you're going to lose a bunch of money. It's going to take years. Sustaining the political cover to do that is very difficult. When you're in a startup where that's the only thing you have to do, well, that's easy in comparison.
That's a very interesting perspective. It is. I mean, I suppose really, my next question is really about this whole topic of Flash. I think kind of we're all here because of that today sort of thing, and I think it's the biggest disruptor in storage today. It is the one biggest thing. And look, everyone knows that storage is a bottleneck in the data center. It's kind of like well established now.
Yes, but it's been I call it the sick man of the data center because it hasn't gotten better in a long time.
Yeah, it's been it has not changed very much in a long time. I think you're right. But like. How do you think mass adoption is going to occur for Flash, and what do you think it's going to change the way people architect data centers? With using Flash here, because it is fundamentally it's a big change. It seems a small change, but actually the impact of it is huge.
Yes, I mean the first thing we see in data centers is most of the time when we install an array, CPU just goes to 100%. And you install array, and even with the products we built it, or the vast majority of our competitors built today, you go from storage being a bottleneck to being not the bottleneck, and not the bottleneck by like a factor of 4. And so there's a lot of work to be done to really take advantage of it, where, okay, well, this creates massive pressure on networks, because now you're just transferring data. And the great news is there's a whole bunch of new network technology that makes that possible. Puts pressure on memory, puts pressure on CPUs. I think at a data center scale, I think it really makes a solid case for more centralized storage, because if you can build a fast network, it can be so much more efficient. And that's a key thing about Flash. Putting SSDs in every computer is really inefficient in comparison to centralized storage. The old way people would build systems is, well, we put a hard drive in there, and we'll use like 1% of it. But it doesn't matter, because it's the same cost no matter if you put a big one or a small one. Well, that's not true anymore. And you can't do the same thing with an SSD. So, I believe that this will push towards more of a trend of shared storage because that's where you drive efficiency.
Yeah.
You now have the possibility of doing lots of things. Take the VDI problem of doing lots and lots of boot ups. Like that seems to be a very, very common problem. Well, now you actually have the same problem in virtual server, and it's just called DR, where DR, you do the failover. Okay, we're now going to boot up 1,000 servers, and that's a reproduction.
It's a really good example.
So first, that makes it more possible, but I think that there's a lot more. There's architecture work where you have to change the networks to get them to catch up. But then I think there's still a lot of interesting work to do with CPU, where the CPU is now the new bottleneck. But that increases the ROI for buying more CPUs. And so I think that you're going to get this ratcheting effect where, okay, you upgrade the storage, now we can upgrade the CPUs, and we need new software now to take advantage of it.
And the bottleneck will just move back
to
the next piece.
But we've taken like a huge swing at saying everything used to be optimized. You used to have to build database systems that had enough DRAM to hold everything you needed. Well, now it's not true anymore. Now taking an I/O hit is not the worst thing in the world. And so, it affects the scalability of systems. It affects over-provision of DRAM. It affects how many CPUs per DRAM. It affects CPUs per network, and all of this stuff. It can now be reconsidered.
Wow, that's really interesting. That is really interesting. I appreciate your opinion on that. I think it's kind of
I think that this is an unestablished thing, so I don't know what's going to happen. But this is just based on what we see, that I think that this is going to drive a lot of change, and not just in physical architecture, but then also the logical architecture of the core applications that get run.
No, that's some. You hit it here first. That's all I'm going to say. You did, So thanks for that, John. That's really good. So the next question, I can ask this to all my guests. We're all engineers. We've all been involved in IT to some degree, and how do you keep your hands on the tools? Do you have a home lab or something? Because I think it's really important that we still do stuff on a day-to-day basis. So we don't just become removed to what's dear and pure to our hearts, kind of thing. So, have you got a home lab? How do you keep your hands on the tools?
So I have an unusual situation because the office is my home lab. I actually live next door to the office, and so I can go and come back, and so there's a huge lab in that sense. But the way we end up developing, because I'm sort of a software person at heart. And we've shrunken everything down so you can actually run a little tiny array on your laptop, and that's usually the mode I work in. But we run a lot of dog food, and we make sure that not only do we run everything, but we run it under horrible conditions. Like we actually, when I talked about building that simulated array, so we put that in a VM, then we put that VM on a storage array. So the storage array is running hundreds of VMs simulating the back end of our storage. And so we build these hybrid systems. There's, personally, I hope that part of the reason that we had to make it simple is because I'm not a very good IT person. Really. And I want to make it so that I can use it, because that's actually a challenge. I do it. And so whenever I get to use it, it's usually straightforward because I actually understand everything that's going on.
So it passes the Hayes test, is that?
The Hayes test.
Right. Okay, cool.
So for hardware, we use Cause as kids to assemble the hardware, and so the software, I have to be able to use it to actually figure out what's going on. But there's sort of the direct hands-on, and then there's also all the stuff we do indirectly. So we collect logs from all of our customers to monitor long-term behavior. And so, we've built a very detailed understanding of how, not just how people use storage systems, but because often the setup isn't the whole thing, but how the sort of the mix of applications end up actually presenting. And that's an area where even research hasn't advanced very far, because no one can get traces. And so, and early on, I worked with a lot more specific customers, just trying to really understand the challenges.
What problems they're trying to solve, sort of thing.
Because our goal is to make it invisible. So
I think that analytics thing is kind of a hidden. I mean, look, I think in IT we're beginning to kind of realize we're collecting all this information and that we actually need to do something with it. But it seems to be like a lot of organizations are focused on that management layer and of like not necessarily what the core product's doing, but how you actually present the information that's being gathered and present it in a way that it's actually of use, to the audience. And I think that's kind of a
Well, that's
really important piece in IT at the moment.
and I think that comes out of, IT environments are now so complex that almost no one knows what's there.
Yeah, sure.
And you see that, and I think that that's something we discovered early on. It's getting sort of worse and worse in storage. Is that the idea that you're going to turn off your storage, like even just understanding what's connected to it at all, is a massive problem.
Yeah,
and so
no,
you
for
have
sure.
to avoid that. Networking, I don't know how they're going to solve that because there are often so many rules that it's almost impossible to track by humans.
Yeah. And I mean, like more and more now we're abstracting, more and more things are being done in software. So
Yeah.
While abstraction means that we can reduce the hardware complexity, actually it's adding more complexity in another layer. Do you know what I mean? So,
Yeah. Well, it makes the whole thing less predictable because you don't know how it'll combine.
Yeah,
so
right. Yeah.
You need tools, and I think this is a lot of what people talk about when they talk about cloud is that they want things to be reliable and fungible in a way. Like they don't want to have to think about the exact intermixing of application.
Right.
They want, if I grant you storage, I want that to be good, and I don't want to have to think about that. So that's a big target for us to try and make every byte of storage equally accessible.
Well, that's good. But so you're saying that you kind of did software development. I mean, do you do any coding now? Then do you
once in a while.
Yeah. What kind
I-
of stuff do you do? Then I mean, it's just more to get an understanding of what. I mean, is it would you do a Python or
Well,
C
so
Sharp?
so
or
I write stuff in C++. So that's what our core product is done.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
I usually end up because I have other duties running around.
Sure,
I'm
yeah.
often too unreliable to be on the main line of code.
Yeah, sure.
But some of the stuff I love looking at is sort of analyzing, looking for core optimizations we can make to improve the product. And I also spend a lot of time looking at how developers actually write software within our system to make sure that have we created practices that make it possible to write software consistently and reliably.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And the only way to figure that out is to spend a lot of time going through real software and talking to people and looking at bugs. And so whenever I get a chance to work hands-on code, that's what I do. And it's either that or trying to write something and seeing how it goes, or looking for interesting new algorithms for how we compress metadata or how we do lookups to see if we can make fundamental improvements on how the product works.
Yeah, cool. Oh, that's good. That's good. It's good. Good to hear that you still got your hands in there. It's not all.
Yes. Yeah.
Any hand in there's good hand.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. So last question, John, was just I know obviously we talked before about you previously working at Yahoo, but for you, what do you think Yahoo? What was the biggest thing that Yahoo kind of contributed to the IT industry? I know it's kind of a big world question, but what, in your view?
I think it was fantasy sports.
Okay, yeah,
Definitely.
Right, yeah.
We can go back.
Yeah.
Yahoo contributed a lot of very fundamental things to the web that we take for granted. Like Yahoo created CGI.
Yeah, well,
and like
quite
really
a few
fundamental things,
yeah.
and they pushed a lot of advance. Yahoo created Hadoop. It was created by a team in Yahoo Research and then released as open source.
Yeah.
But I'd still go with fantasy sports.
Fantasy sports, yeah.
Yes.
Wow, I'll have to have a look at that. Oh, well, yeah. Cool. Okay, well, thanks, John, for your time. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for speaking. Yeah. Cheers, man.
Cheers.
Thanks, yeah.